So I think we'll just make a start. I'm Elizabeth Gammy and I'm head of the Aberdeen Business School, and it's delighted to welcome you all this afternoon to the next in our series of the RGU Knowledge Bites for Business. Today's webinar that I'm really looking forward to is from imposter to superhero. I've got a couple of great speakers to come along to speak to you about this today. But before that, I would just like to go over a couple of housekeeping issues here. So Claire, if you can share the slides again, please.
Sorry, I'm just going to, Erica, are you there just to share those slides for me, please?
So it looks as though we're having a little technical hitch here. Hopefully we will get the slides back on screen shortly.
I think more than that, we probably need Erica back on screen. I think Erica's been kicked out.
That's her just coming back in now.
There she is.
Excellent.
That's not a marvellous start, Claire. I've just been kicked out. Apologies.
Yes. Not great when one of our key speakers gets kicked out. So can everybody please keep their fingers and toes crossed that the rest of this session is going to go appropriately. Can you try sharing your screen again, Erica?
Yeah, I think it's saying host disabled participant screen sharing.
Yeah, I've just given you the rights, Erica. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, don't we all just love the technology?
It was all going so well.
Excellent. Okay, thanks very much, Erica. So just a bit of housekeeping here. Please ensure that you've signed in using your full name rather than a nickname. All the participants' microphones will be muted. However, you're very welcome to keep your camera on. We do encourage you to ask questions during the session or make any observations, and you can do that using the chat box facility, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the presentation, I will then pose some of these questions on your behalf to the panel. Please do remember, however, that everything that you type may be visible to all others who join the session. So please don't share personal data or make any inappropriate comments. And please also note that this session will be recorded. Not everyone can make the webinars, but actually we do have lots of people that come in and look at them after the event. So please note that this recording will take place. So a little bit about the two speakers that we've got here this afternoon. First of all is Erica. Erica Cargill is an academic strategic lead at the Aberdeen Business School, where she heads up a team which delivers business education across a suite of undergraduate and postgraduate level courses, including the school's flagship MBA programme. Erica's research interests lie in early career development and the ever-changing nature of the professional skill set. She's a chartered member of the CIPD and a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Our other speaker is Susan Gordon, who's a seasoned HR professional with 30 years experience, including international oil and gas, and as a university senior lecturer, actually also at Aberdeen Business School. She's lived and worked internationally and now runs her own consultancy business, Leith Gordon Limited. Susan is a certified strength-based coach with a passion to equip individuals, leaders and teams to identify, appreciate and unleash their own unique superpowers so they can positively tackle whatever challenges work and life presents. So, no further ado, over to Erica, who's going to kick off this session.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, everybody. Really lovely to see such a good turnout to the session today. And I'm delighted to be accompanied in this session by friend and colleague Susan for this session that we've called From Imposter to Superhero. Now, we made a conscious decision with this session to use the standard version of Zoom rather than the webinar version. And we hope that we'll be able to get a little bit of interactivity going. So just to encourage you all to engage with us as we're trying to do little polls and ask some questions of you. And hopefully we can get a little bit of chat going in the chat box as well. Don't feel that you need to ask some kind of groundbreaking question in the chat box. It might just be that something particularly resonates with you and you just might want to make a comment, and feel free to just pop something in. In setting the scene for this session, I thought it might be useful to let you know that Susan and I actually came together through the medium of imposter syndrome. Now, we did know each other, or know of each other. We'd worked at the same institution, albeit at different times. But when I was going through, let's call it my own battle with imposter syndrome a few years ago, as a result of a job change, Susan, I sought Susan out professionally in her role as a career coach, and we recognised a shared interest in the topics that we're going to be respectively discussing today. Now, although I'm an academic, this is not an area that I'm published in. It's an area that I've got a really practical interest in. And I think that for both Susan and I, we've seen some real transformational change in that journey from imposter to superhero. And hopefully we'll be able to share some of that with you today and it will resonate with you. This is a presentation of two halves. You can see on the slide there, the imposter syndrome bit, I suppose, is presented kind of as a problem. There are dark kind of monochrome slides and you know, maybe looking a little bit more foreboding. And then we'll come on to the superhero bit that Susan will cover, which is much more visually appealing and brightly coloured. And I think probably that makes us into bad cop and good cop. But I hope that what we will have to say will resonate with you, as I say, and will maybe bring us all out of what's probably been a fairly monochrome last few months and into hopefully a brighter, more colourful time ahead. Okay, we're going to start off with a very quick poll. Claire, can I ask you to share the first poll? This poll is anonymous, so nothing, we'll never track your answer back to you. But I just wanted to take a little bit of a temperature of the room. What stage are you at in your career currently? And I've given you a few options there. If you could just pop your preferred option in. Quite a spread as I would have expected, but still going up quite a little bit. Claire, can you share the results there with everybody? And you can see there, you know, we are all going through career transition, I suppose, at the moment as a result of not quite knowing what lies ahead over the next few months, but you've got quite a spread there. Now, just a little bit about why I asked that question. Career stage is a really interesting one. Because it might be thought that as you progress in your career, you will become more confident, you will be more competent, and you will then be able to convey that to others. And that those imposter syndrome feelings might reduce at that point. What the research actually tells us is that not only does imposter syndrome not disappear, but it actually becomes more prevalent often as your career advances. And you know, much of that is as you progress in your career, you take on more leadership roles. You're, I suppose, a bit more visible. You're kind of, you know, on your own. People are looking at you, and there's also a whole lot of you don't know what you don't know until you get that little bit further on in your career. So I just really wanted to, you know, sort of get a little bit of an establishment of what we've got in the room today, and you know, hopefully that will resonate with some of you that maybe, you know, leaving university, you're full of confidence and you're ready to, you know, change the world, and then maybe further along some of these challenges have hit, and that is absolutely normal and to be expected. Now, we didn't specifically ask about gender, but Claire, you can stop the polling now. You can pull down that across the screen. Yeah, we didn't ask specifically about gender, but we can see from a quick look around the room that we're not an all-female audience. And actually, the research on imposter syndrome, when this research kicked off back in the 70s, it was thought to be a very female issue. However, the reason it was thought to be a very female issue was because the data gathered was from females. And of course, then that completely biased all the research that was going on at that time. We now know that not only is it not only a female issue, but it's actually been shown to be almost as prevalent amongst men. And it can often be thought to be more problematic in men because there is less willingness to vocalise feelings and perhaps less of a network in order to discuss any of these sorts of challenges. Now, the other thing to mention, just in relation to the question that I asked, is that imposter syndrome experience between the research would suggest between about 60 and 70% of the working population. So you possibly signed up to the session thinking this is really significant for me. It might be that you are actually just leading a team in which you think that there may be some challenges there, or colleagues. But the likelihood is that none of us will go through our careers without either coming across it within ourselves or within those that we are working with because of its prevalence. Okay, now, Claire, the poll is still on my screen, but maybe that's just because I need to minimise it. Apologies, it's maybe not on everybody else's screen, hopefully not anyway. Okay, there are a few questions on this slide here. This is just me sharing some of the early research. The URL on the left-hand side there is a link to the full diagnostic questionnaire for imposter syndrome, which was developed by a lady called Pauline Clance in the US. As I say, her research started in the 70s, and this tool has been refined since then. Now, I haven't got the whole questionnaire there. I just selected a few questions that I thought would kind of allow you to do a little bit of self-diagnosis. And I'm not going to do a poll. I just thought it might be a bit too much of a faff to do 5 different questions. But I've popped up 5 questions that I think probably kind of reflect what the questionnaire is really trying to get at. And in each of these questions, there is a Likert scale, and you can see that along the bottom. So if you scored yourself as not at all true, it would be 1 point, very true, 5 points. So can I ask you just to quickly have a think about each of those questions and to jot down your own thoughts as to where you would be on that Likert scale. So I've often succeeded on a test or task, even though I was afraid that I would not do well before I undertook that task. What's your thoughts on that? I rarely do a project or task as well as I'd like to. I tend to remember the instance in which I have not done my best more than those I have done my best. That's a particularly challenging one for me. I sometimes think I obtained my present position or gained my present success because I happened to be in the right place at the right time or knew the right people. And I feel bad and discouraged if I'm not the best, or at least very special in situations that involve achievement. So very quick, not a lot of thought to be put into it, just jot down. And Claire, can I ask you to share the second poll, please? Okay, so again, quickly, anonymously, where would your score be? I suppose out of a maximum of 25 at the high end, middle of the road, or at the low end? Okay, thank you for engaging in that. Claire, you can just share those results again, and you can see that there is a prevalence towards the middle to upper end, which of course, I would expect you will have self-selected to come along to this session, but I think hopefully it kind of lets you see that 60 to 70% of the population, it's a really significant proportion of not only of ourselves but those that we're working with as well. Thank you. Now, you might say, does it matter? Does a bit of adrenaline not keep us on our toes, kind of make us perform at our best? Well, all of the research would tell us that imposter syndrome leads to increased levels of stress, which, yes, on a kind of short-term basis might give you that kind of extra adrenaline buzz, but in a longer-term situation will lead to increased levels of stress, burnout, decreased job performance, decreased job satisfaction, and inevitably staff turnover. So whether you're an employer or an employee, it can be particularly challenging. This feeling of being on high alert all the time and never quite living up to the expectations that you've got of yourself is really tiring. And as I say, over the long term can be particularly damaging. Now, a little bit on what the literature says, and I mentioned that the research here started back in the 70s, and it has been, as a concept, it's been quite heavily researched on both sides of the Atlantic. And the first quote that I've got there, a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evident success, is from a US study. The next one down, Claire Yosa, is a UK researcher who's doing a lot of work actually in this space at the moment. She's written a very good book, which if you're particularly interested in developing your interest in developing your knowledge in this, I would recommend it. So she says imposter syndrome happens when there's a mismatch between who you see yourself as currently being and who you think you need to be to achieve a goal, despite the evidence that you're more than capable. And the final quote there from Michelle Obama, it's not an academic quote. It's a very much her personal view. The question I ask myself is, am I good enough? And that haunts us because the messages we're sent from the time we're little is maybe you're not. Don't reach too high. Don't talk too loud. Now, interestingly, imposter syndrome doesn't actually equate with low self-esteem or low self-confidence, as you might think. It aligns much more with perfectionism. And in high-achieving adults, you tend to see it being particularly prevalent. So a lot of the research has been done around professional environments, medicine, accountancy, academia, etc. And sort of collectively, what the early research said was that there were 3 conditions that had to be met in order for you to confirm that you were suffering from imposter syndrome. First is that you got where you are today by fooling others. Secondly, that you're constantly terrified of being exposed as a fraud. Somebody's going to find you out. And thirdly, that you can't attribute your own success to your own internal qualities. It's down to somebody else. That was the team that I worked with. It's the line manager that I had at the time. It wasn't me that achieved that. And more recent research has actually said of those 3, only one of them needs to be present before imposterism can be confirmed. So, I think, as I say, 60 to 70% of us, and I would imagine that some of those comments that I've given you there probably resonate with you. Now, while it's clear that imposter syndrome is a significant challenge, tackling it is the bit that's really difficult, because imposter syndrome has been identified as being really at the very core of our identity. It's not about what we do and what other people see us doing, because they can see that we're perfectly competent and perfectly able. But it's about how we see ourselves. And that's the bit that's really, really deep inside us, that's really, really difficult to surface. So questions like, who am I? What if they find me out? What if I'm not good enough? As Michelle Obama says, these are the kinds of questions that are really kind of at the heart of how we see ourselves. And I suppose that's what differentiates imposter syndrome from a more benign form of fear like self-doubt. Self-doubt is about, can I do that? Do I think I can do it? Or do I think I can't do it? Imposter syndrome is about, who am I? And what on earth right do I have to think that I, personally me, can achieve that? So that's why tackling who you are rather than what you do is the key to tackling imposter syndrome. And hopefully we'll be able to pick up on some of that with Susan's section of the presentation. Now, this is an interesting little model that I just think resonates with quite a lot of people in this situation. So the 4 Ps of imposter syndrome, these are the indicators of what's running below the surface. So I think you might say that they are kind of how imposter syndrome manifests itself in our behaviours. And these behaviours, as I say, are all a response to the stress, the feelings of stress that we have when we're in this kind of constant phase of high alert. So first of those P's is paralysis, and this is the proverbial rabbit caught in the headlights. So we know what needs to be done, we know we're capable of doing it, but there's something stopping us. We can't quite get over the line, we can't quite get it done because we're in that kind of state of fear. What might happen is kind of uppermost in our minds rather than just let's get it done. And this can stop us applying for jobs, it can stop us speaking up in meetings, it can stop us thinking that that we are good enough. So that's the first of our 4 Ps. The second of our 4 Ps is procrastination. This is concerned with keeping busy but not actually moving forward. So, you know, we all have masses of things on our to-do list, and we've got the really difficult things that are, you know, towards that the bottom of that list that we don't get to. But we're you know, everybody can see that we're really busy. So I think, you know, we sometimes struggle to get to the end of a project or task, get the very last thing ticked off, because when we do that, we then have to hand it over, and then somebody might see that we're not as good as they thought that we were, or they're not as good as you know, we think we should be. So it will stop us from you know, throwing ourselves into these interesting projects, and certainly occupy us with things that are not moving our careers forward. Perfectionism is the third P, yeah, and this one involves raising your own internal standards to that impossibly high level that we're never going to ever be able to achieve. And that tends to manifest itself in workaholic tendencies. You know, who hasn't been in that situation where we think, you know, if I'm the last one to leave, you know, it will be some sort of validation of my competence. I think with this one, it's often displayed by signing up for additional courses. You know, once I've qualified in that, then I'll be the expert that I want to be. Yeah, and you know, I'll no longer feel like a fraud. I think that you know, it's certainly something that that we maybe see often in academic environments. I think, you know, it's absolutely important that you develop your skills, but don't see that as the validation of your competence always. The fourth P then is people pleasing, and that's when you take on more than you should, and either in a corporate setting where you just say, I'm not going to delegate that because I'm just quicker, better doing it myself, and if I kind of keep it in within me, then it will get done. And then on the other side, if you're in a self-employed setting, it might be that you offer more of yourself than you should for free. So I'll just do that, and then maybe they'll want to contract me for some work. Yeah, so people pleasing, trying to keep everybody happy by sort of internalizing everything and keeping it going yourself. So I hope that some of that has given you some food for thought, helped you, resonated with you. This is a model that we'll come back to. Susan will come back to. I think it's quite a useful one in terms of really understanding exactly where and how imposter syndrome can take hold. So you'll see above the surface is the actions. This is what we let everybody else see. This is what other people see of us, and this is where people's opinions of our ability are formed. But this is not what we think about. If we are suffering from imposter syndrome, we're right down here. We're at this identity level, and it's right down to who am I, and you know, do I have that that confidence in myself, and you know, can I get that out to others? So we ignore all of this bit above the surface, because this is the bit down here that is really the troubling element. And I know Susan is going to come back to that. Now, like many conditions, there is no one single cause, and to some extent, probably looking back doesn't help us an awful lot. You know, we can all look back into our history and try to identify, and actually what we're more interested in is looking forward. However, just for completeness of my kind of look around the literature, I just thought I would flag up some of the more common causes that are coming through. So up on the right-hand side there, a sibling argument, and labelling by parents is one of the kind of earliest researched areas in terms of cause of imposter syndrome. So the messaging by our parents as to what success looks like. So are you the clever one? Are you the quiet, diligent one? Are you the noisy, feisty one? And you know, it is believed that that sort of messaging is kind of built into that very deep perception of how we see ourselves. Now, many of us are parents, and I don't want anyone to be thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done to my child? Or what has been done to me? As I say, it is much more important that we look forward and that we try and think about how do we tackle this? How do we change these challenges that we're facing? The second cause then is around psychological traits, and I have talked already about high achieving adults. Psychological traits of neuroticism and anxiety tend to be the areas of research that come up in terms of looking for cause. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to dig into that aspect, but there is quite a lot of research out there that makes that link between imposterism and neuroticism and anxiety, if you wanted to go and have a look at that. The third one is a feeling of belonging, and there's a suggestion that the environment that we're in can really support us to overcome feelings of imposterism. So there's a real focus in the more recent research where you find your environment, you find your crew, and you're able to get yourself over some of these barriers. One recent article even said imposter syndrome is a symptom and inequality is the disease. So, it kind of links it back to some of the gender stuff that we talked about earlier. More recently, there's been some work done on a link between imposterism and social media. Now, what does social media not get blamed for these days? But there is a perception that, of course, everything in social media, everybody, if you look on LinkedIn, everybody else has got their career all sorted. Everybody's got their shit together, and I'm the only one that's not quite there yet. So that's a more recent area of explanation. But as I say, this is looking at causes, and what we want to do is to look forward. So that's my bad cop bit done. Just pulling this together a little bit. A reminder that imposter syndrome can be really damaging. It can be really damaging to us personally, but it can be really damaging career-wise as well. But steps can be taken to counteract its effects. And not just by taking actions, but by tackling how we see ourselves, and specifically how we see what we have to offer in an organisational environment. And that's the bit that Susan is going to explore in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to pass over to my good cop, Susan, to take over from here.
Great, thank you very much. I think we should call ourselves dynamic duo rather than good cop, bad cop. Should we just go for that? Okay, I'd like to invite you to do a little exercise with me. So I'm going to ask you to put your hand up if you always, and I've got 3 questions to ask you then. So for those of you on screen, please feel free to do the waving thing. Those of you who have got your cameras off, if you could use one of the emojis to kind of signify whether you want to put your hand up for that particular one or not, that would be great. So that would be super. If you want to switch your camera on, if it's easier to do that, and again, you can do that too. So 3 questions here I want to ask you about. Put your hand up if you always speak to people on planes, trains, in the lift. Who does that? Who does the chatting? Oh, we've got a few people here that do the chatting. Let me just skip to the next screen, have a little look. Yeah, okay, so a few people do that. Thank you very much, you can take that down. Put your hand up if you always make to-do lists and checklists, even at the weekend. That's me. Definitely put my hand up that way. Oh, wow, got a few here. Okay, thank you very much. And you can take them down again. And thank you for the person in the chat, that's super. Put your hand up if you always colour coordinate your pencils, clothes, things are all quite nice, neatly done. So have we got any colour coordinators amongst us? Okay, got a few less of those, but okay, good. Thank you very much. I'll come back to the point of the putting your hand up stuff in a minute. But let's, in the meantime, go back to that iceberg and start to explore that a little bit. So Erica spoke a little bit about this, but this is really quite a fundamental one to start to think about focusing away from the what I do and start thinking about who I am. Because as Erica said, that's where the key is to unlocking these feelings that we've got, that am I good enough? Now, many people are reluctant to investigate the who I am, because they feel maybe I'm not good enough. So it takes a little bit of courage to sort of start digging into this. And it's easier for us to sit above the waterline there in the what I do. And it's how we're kind of brought up a lot of times. You know, at work or at home, we speak a lot about the achievements we have, the certificates we've got, as Erica mentioned, the qualifications, the what I do at work, task-based focus stuff. And then in a workplace particularly, we rarely speak about what's beneath the surface and what really matters to us. Because that little anxious voice is given a, you know, am I really good enough? And is this the right place to speak about it? But it is where the power lies in terms of starting to overcome this stuff. Because if you start to explore who I am and discover, actually, you know, we don't need to be fabulous to be amazing, then think about the actual power that gives the individual. And another way of looking at this kind of iceberg thing, above it, we speak a lot about core competence, don't we? Particularly in a workplace. Beneath the surface, we're really speaking about core confidence. So this is an opportunity for you to start, working on that core confidence. And part of sorry, just before we finish that one, part of this as well is that we need to start digging beneath the surface and finding out, who am I and what am I good at? Because that is really good to remind ourselves about, we are good enough. But we do things, we're naturally inclined to do things in very different ways. Even the little 3 exercises about put your hands up, you'll see a very different number of people put their hands up for each one, which is kind of gives you an idea that, we are built differently. And we kind of know that, but sometimes we forget about that and we end up trying to be somebody else's strengths when actually they're not ours. We don't really own them. So having that dig here is quite good. So that's what the rest of the session is about, starting to have a little dig around for that. Kind of thank you. Now, I think partly we've kind of brought up in a very conventional approach to personal development or even development in the workplace. And the conventional approach to development is kind of along the lines of, let's look at what we're not good at and let's put an improvement plan in to do that more. Yep, you've got a few things that you do quite well, but tick, just keep going with them. And you get into this kind of Groundhog Day of focusing on stuff that you're not so good at and you're never really going to be good at. And this is all built on some poor assumptions, that those being, first of all, that we can learn all behaviours to a level of excellence. And secondly, that, as long as we try hard enough, we can have that excellence. Now, we kind of know that that's not actually right. If somebody's naturally not very good with numbers, they're probably not going to be the next Nobel Prize winner for statistics or whatever it is. So we kind of know that, yet in the workplace, we kind of persist in doing this kind of routine. So we're inviting you to start thinking about another approach to your development. Can you skip on to the next slide, please? And that's the sort of strengths-based approach to personal development. And this is really based on the fact that, beneath that waterline, the who I am, we are very different. And us trying to figure out, what are we, who are we when we're at our very best? And how do we contribute? Oops, sorry, my screen has just kind of gone funny. And how we contribute in our own unique ways is really important. Because beforehand, when I spoke about, we spend a lot of time speaking about what we do. When people spend time speaking to us about who I am and start to recognize some of our strengths, oftentimes we kind of brush it away. If somebody says, oh, you're really good at that, oftentimes we just brush it away. We either think, well, it's my job, or doesn't everybody do it like that? Well, no, they don't. Remember the hand up exercise? We do not do things the same way. So what are those unique ways that is your very best? And it's also based on the assumption that you can only learn some behaviors to a level of excellence. We can do lots of things, but really what we're looking here are the spikes of excellence, that starburst. Where is it? Where is your starburst? And so we start to focus on developing people's talents, their naturally occurring, really positive ways of thinking, behaving, reacting to things. And we also have to make sure that we're managing the weaknesses. And those weaknesses are kind of the blind spots, the things that if we have a strength, it casts a shadow. We've got to look in there and make sure we're not too much of anything really great, but we're focusing on the positive stuff. And because it's been found that basically if you try and fix weaknesses in a development scenario, really all you're ever going to do is prevent failure, which is important. But in this context, we're speaking about sustained success and personal validation of what is your core confidence and are you good enough? So it's important we do look at the strengths along the way. So that's kind of what we're inviting you to kind of maybe change your mindset. Now, in this next one here, I'm trying to make the point that in the strengths discussion that we're having here, some people think, well, if I've got a talent for something, that's fine. That's the same as having a strength. Well, actually, it's not. Just being able to know that you've got a talent for something, a way of operating, doesn't mean you're actually good at it. It's a bit like having a tool in your hand and not using it. So therefore, maybe you can just sort of put the next text up, please, Erica. You know, what we're looking for here is something that ultimately is a strength, and that's the ability to consistently provide near perfect performance. Those starburst things. Where are your spikes of excellence? Where are those strengths? And that means that we've got to pick up this talent, which in this definition is again, if you can just, a natural way of thinking, feeling, or behaving. So that bit about, you know, putting up your hands, etc. That's your natural way of thinking, feeling, behaving. Pick it up. And then the important thing is the next bit, the investment, when you actually intentionally start to use some of these talents, not fumbling over and it seems to be a bit of an accident, etc. So starting to actually think about, okay, when I'm at my very best, what does that look like? And how can I do that again more often? Means that ultimately you'll end up really, really having a look at what your strengths are. So that's what we're kind of trying to encourage you here. And the superhero analogy we've got here is a bit like the and I see some people here that I recognise, that you'll recognise this story, but I love the analogy of the superhero in the superhero movie. In the superhero movie, to start with, the superhero has no idea that they are such. And then something happens that they find that they have got some superpowers. So what I'm inviting you to do is go find your superpowers. But that's just not enough. Again, back to what it says here, you've got to actually pick up that superpower and start to use it. But it doesn't necessarily go to plan to start with. As our superheroes, you know, they've got to practice a little bit, intentionally apply it, and then they get good things coming out of it. And like the superhero as well, we have to take responsibility for our own superpowers, for the good bits, as well as some of the blind spots we have. So this isn't an abdication of responsibility, unlike this, deal with it. This is taking real ownership and driving yourself in a very positive way in order that you can be your very best. So moving it on, conscious of time, we'd like to invite you to start thinking about what your superpowers may be. And on the screen here, you can see 3 what they call clues to talent. And if you start thinking about, you know, okay, when am I at my very best? You can start asking yourself these kind of questions and it will give you some clues. So have a think about the things that you find really easy to do. It's just like really natural, you pick it up and folks kind of give it the whole, you know, how did you manage to do that? So what's easy for you? And I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to have a think about this. The things that you really love doing as well, you know, it makes your heart sing. Be that in out of work and also, you know, in a workplace. What are the kind of things that you think, yeah, I don't mind. If I've got to choose to do that, that's fine. I love doing that. And one of those really special times when you're in that flow, where time disappears, you know, it's great performance from you, creative, you know, you're adding value. What does that look like? So I'd just kind of invite you just for a few seconds to jot those questions down to yourself, and, you know, jot some answers down too, but obviously have a think about what it means for you. So is there anybody that would I was going to say want to put it in the chat, and I've just opened up the chat and the first one's made me laugh. My superpower is making wine disappear. Indeed. There are some superpowers that are very useful. But if anyone would like to share in the chat, or if you are brave enough to take yourself off mute and offer us up anything, that'd be great, but you don't feel as though you have to. It's a daunting audience to be discussing this with, but So like I said, I just invite you to have a think about this yourself, and a proper think about, you know, when are these times, because that will give you a clue to the sorts of things that you are naturally really good at. So we'll kind of move on. So one way of kind of identifying your superpowers is just reflecting and thinking. And another way of doing it is using a tool. And again, some of you who are here today have seen this tool before. This particular tool is called Gallup Clifton Strengths. And it's been on the go for a long, long time. And I use it with my clients because I find it really super useful to get into that conversation so people can start to explore, when they're at their very best, what does it look like? Because some people find it quite hard to articulate that to themselves. I use this tool because it is based on positive psychology approach. It's looking at what is right with you rather than focusing on what is wrong with us. And if we're asked to, in a conventional development side, we are asked to focus on what is wrong with us, we don't actually have any headspace to be even better at the stuff that we're already good at. So here we're talking about what is right with you. This particular tool has got about 50 years of research behind it. It's been done across the globe, and to date it's been completed over 25 million times. So there is a shed load of data that sits behind it, which I quite like. And it measures the talent most directly related to the potential for success. And you can see on the right-hand side, it boils down to four what's called domains. And those domains are around thinking, building relationships, the why and the influencing, and then how we get things done. And we do this in very different ways. And you see there's 34 elements under there. I'm not expecting you to read them and understand them all. But it boils it down really nicely, and you get this report which kind of categorizes on your reactions about, you know, where do your talents lie. So it's another way of getting some clues or reminders of where you're really good. And it also, I really like it because it gives a language, particularly in a workplace, to talk about who I am, which is not terribly common in many workplaces. We're always above the waterline in the what I do. We're in the competence chat. We're not in the confidence chat. So it gives us this language, and like any language, we have to learn how to use it. It can be pretty clumsy at first, but then I think the power that people find in it is amazing. It's really great. And one of the things I like about this, because it feeds into diversity particularly, is that there's a 1 in 33 million chance, given the algorithms that are in here, that the top 5 talents that come out are in the same order as anybody else. So if that doesn't speak to diversity, I don't know what does. And if we go back to our iceberg model and thinking about diversity, above the waterline, we've got a lot of visible diversity, gender, race, maybe disability. And then as we come further down, this is the diversity that is invisible, how we work, how we operate, and the cognitive diversity. So, you know, if you individually or your organizations are interested in diversity, have a look at these kind of tools, because it's got such access to something, a different conversation. And it's a really great opportunity to start to identify your talents and then pick up that tool, that talent, and practice with it, build on it, and then, you know, be responsible for your own self, so that ultimately you can be that shining star, that superhero with the individual superhero powers, the 1 in 33 million chance you're going to be like any other superhero. So why not? What is there to lose? So the gentle stepping from imposter to superhero from that side. And by the way, there's loads of information on that in the Gallup website, for example, and other places if you want to read up more about it. So on that, I'm going to hand back to Erica. You're on mute, Erica.
Apologies. Gosh, I think I know by now. There is a slide of references at the very end, so you can pick up on any of the things that we've talked about and do some additional reading. So just to round up then, many of us, you know, up to 70% of us are dealing with imposter syndrome, and that imposter syndrome can rear its head at times that we least expect it, at times when our career is potentially quite advanced, and at times that we possibly feel that we should know better. It is, as we've said, right at the very core of who you are. But I think that the thing to encourage you to think about and to realise is you're not alone in dealing with this. There are ways of tackling that perception of who you are, and one of those is to focus on talents.
And basically, yeah, so I was jotting down a question for later, but certainly, you can start to have a think about it and identify your own talents, and then, be mindful about it and start practicing, start investing in them, and they will be powerful to you. And we'd invite you to consider, from here on in, what have you taken from today? What are you going to take on board that you can be responsible for yourself and for exploring your own superpowers? And what are they? Ask yourself. So on that, I think we just the final one, go forth, be that superhero. It's up to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Both of you, it was really fascinating actually. Can I just ask everyone, if you've got questions, can you please pop the questions into the chat function? There's one or two coming up, and so I will kick off with what we've got so far. And I'm just wondering, as a leader, what can leaders in an organisation do to help break down imposter syndrome in their teams?
I guess the argument that we're making here is look across your team and think about the diversity that you have within your team, and consider, how can you get the most from your team by using their combination of talents. So rather than seeing individuals and what they can contribute, look across the team and think about the combinations. And you can see there, Susan and I have popped our own top 5 Gallup strengths there, and there's one of those in common between the two of us. But my top talent is individualization, which is about being able to put together different combinations of individuals to achieve. Now, that's something that I hadn't really ever considered before I did the Gallup Strengths tool, but it's something that I now recognise that it is something that I do, and that I probably feel really comfortable and in the zone when I'm doing. So yeah, my view would be very much to be thinking, recognising as a leader that imposter syndrome will be affecting some of your team, but how can you help them to overcome it? And it's not going to be about saying, oh, you did a really good job there, because they're going to then say, well, actually, no, that was my colleague, or that was my team, or that was us collectively. They're not going to hear that, because that's actions, but really to try and help dig down to these strengths and try and surface those.
And I think before that, though, I would say, back to the twee little pointing finger thing. So as a leader looking around, giving it the, how can I sort my team out? I'd say there's 3 fingers pointing back at them. So the first thing for, if the leader wants to tackle this at all, be that superhero and lead the way by demonstrating a strengths-based approach, and figure out who you are and what kind of impact you have on other people before you go out and try and sort other people out, I would say.
Okay.
Maybe that's a bit harsh, but that's my thought.
I've got a couple of related questions here, actually. And the first one is around, well, I'll put them both at the same time because they're a bit related. But the first one is around workplace culture. And does that play a part, like in a competitive environment where you might be put down more and where you feel bad? And then there was one kind of associated with this, I think, is how do you deal with criticism from managers with regards to your competence and contribution when it's not constructive?
I'm going to tackle the first part of that just because I picked up on it at the very end of the imposter bit, which was around that feeling of belonging. And yes, very much the organisational environment will either support you to overcome imposter syndrome or potentially allow it to run wild. So I do think, you know, that there is definitely an onus on the organisation and the culture of the organisation. And you know, it is down to all of us. You know, culture is a collective thing, and so the more informed we are, and the more supportive we are of ourselves and our own challenges, but also colleagues as well, I think the more we can help to overcome that. But you know, one individual cannot change a culture, and there might sometimes be circumstances in which you are feeling, actually, this is not the right environment for me. I am not demonstrating my strengths within this environment. It's just not working.
Mm-hmm. And I think, just to add on to that, you know, what I said before in terms of the leader being the really important part here. And by leader, I mean not just the person that's got leader in the title, but the people who are leaders in the organization, even informal ones. If they're providing an environment where it's okay to understand that to be your best, you are different, then you can tap into that. But if we're in environments where to be successful, we all have to act like, name a person, then you know, there's a 1 in 33 million chance that naturally I'm going to be able to operate successfully like that. That's a pretty poor place to be. So I suppose what we're advocating is more people understanding this language, and the more people that understand it and start to use it, and there's a couple of people on this call today that have started doing it in their teams. It's clunky to start with because it is a slightly different language, and it operates on more of a, you know, personal level in a sense than we're used to at work. But if you're in an environment where it's safe to do that and to start to use that, that's when you'll see some changes. You know, in environments where the traditional approach to development about, you're not very good at that, do more of it, that is a tough one. That is an absolutely tough one. And so I think it's a little bit here about a little bit of momentum, more people seeing that there's a positive here, and more people that start to use it, and hopefully it moves it forward. And this stuff, I should have said earlier, the strength stuff, you can either use as an individual and, you know, do it individually with people doing career transitions, or there's a lack of confidence or something like that, but also using it in a team setting. So once you've understood yourself, you can use it in a team setting and see how others are built. But you know, I am advocating more people understanding that approach, and I think that's the only way that it can come. Not easy, it's not silver bullet, as Erica said.
So on the topic then of language, another question that's come in is, what kind of language should you use as a superhero?
Okay, I'm not quite sure what that question means, but I'll give it a shot, and then whoever asked it, please let me know if I've answered it. I suppose the language I'm speaking about is the positive side, the understanding that when we're at our very best, this is what it looks like, this is how I operate, this is how you operate, and it's okay for us to speak about the positives and be proud of who we are with that core confidence, yet realizing that we're not perfect. That's okay. And the language is about using that positivity and kind of not being into the negative all the time. I don't know if I've answered that question though, so please re-ask the question.
Hi Susan, it's Gillian Taylor here. It was on one of the questions from about based in a workplace. So when we talk about superheroes and you know, being a superhero within a workplace, sometimes it can be quite daunting to try and be a superhero in a workplace, you know, when perhaps you people around you are not that types, or your boss is not that type, you know, and you're seen as, well, who do they think they are, and you know that kind of thing. And it's how can you use language to help you be that superhero, if that makes sense?
I'm with you now. So I mean, I think for the likes of the Clifton Strengths Report and folks that have done it who are on here that might be able to say a little bit more, keep me honest here. But that gives you quite a nice set of language to use about yourself that you might not necessarily have come up with yourself, but is actually true. And so that the way we speak about ourselves, we can use the language out of the reports, for example, and not some of the high level themes that they're called, you know, like maximizing. You know, if you say I'm maximizer, you know, what does that mean? It's just kind of a clue to how you operate. So you can talk about what sits underneath it in terms of how you like to operate. But it's also not just about how the language that you're using, it's like what you're doing for yourself and what are you thinking about in terms of, you know, what do you bring to this particular party? What are your strengths and how can you make sure you're operating like that on a day-to-day basis? And what do you need from others? And how can you go and ask them for that in a way that's acceptable? So there's a lot of self-learning, but you're quite right. You know, if you're surrounded with people, continuing the superhero analogy, if you're surrounded with people with kryptonite in their hands, that is tough going. So finding out ways of supporting, getting support for yourself as you start to do this is pretty important.
Oh, that's fantastic, Susan. Thank you.
Just linking it back to the imposter stuff, the 4 Ps that we looked at, you know, elements like procrastination. If you are tackling something that you know is a strength, you don't have to tell everybody about it, but you're just tackling, you know, that project that you've never quite got finished and over the line, in a way that's really going to play to your strengths, then you can quietly achieve. Without necessarily being overt about it. And I know that in the chat there's been a few comments about working in very male-dominated, macho-aggressive workplaces, and you know, maybe that's the way of doing it, is to kind of quietly let those superpowers surface.
I'm out of time, so I'm just going to ask one more question actually, and it was interesting. I think a point, Erica, that you made around how the later you can become in your career stage, actually, how imposter syndrome can actually intensify. And I think you did talk a little bit about kind of high performing individuals, but I'm keen to understand, why does it intensify as you get a bit further on? And I'll give you an example. When I was doing my PhD, the more I read and the more I got into the literature, the more I felt that I knew absolutely nothing. Whereas if I looked at where I started off from, I knew very little. And by the time I got to the end of my PhD, I did know a lot, but I actually felt that I knew even less than I did when I started.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. You know, you don't know what you don't know until you're in that situation. And you know, that's one element of it, I suppose, is you know, and I don't mean to be sort of youthful naivety. I don't mean that in any derogatory sense, but you know, of course, you know, we do have a lack of knowledge about how things work often when we first enter the workplace. But I think it's especially as you're going into a leadership position, it's just that exposure. Everybody's watching to see what you come up with. You know, as you start to get into a team leadership position, or even leading on projects, you're just more exposed. You're on your own. There are more eyes drilling into you at that point, and I think that's when it often can just become a bit challenging.
And just to underpin that as well, I mean, I think, you know, again, it goes back to, in the workplace, we're often speaking about what we're doing. You know, do we know this information? Have we done this? Have we done this? You know, asking yourself, can you do that? Yeah, you probably could if you've got the time and all the rest of it. But this is also about who I am, and am I good enough? And can I, you know, will somebody actually find me out that I'm not good enough? So there's a slightly different thing there. You know, can I do that thing above the waterline if I wanted to and had the time, etc.? Probably yes. But is it the core confidence? I can't really do this. I don't know what I'm doing.
Thank you. So one very last question, I suspect quite a lot of people are quite interested in, but how do you get access to do the strengths test?
So if you go to the Gallup website, gallup.com, if you type in Clifton strengths, you get an option of doing top 5 or 34. my personal view is the 34 is more interesting, although the folks that have done it will tell you it's quite overwhelming to start with. But you know, even the top 5 could be useful. They're not expensive. You can do them yourself. And then I think, you know, the important thing is that, you know, having somebody, I think, talk it through with you as well, or having somebody that you can speak to about it, because otherwise it just becomes another report that you've done that you pop in your bottom drawer and don't do again. But it's really easy to do, or just give me a shout individually. My email's sitting there and I can direct you to it, no problem.
In response to Aileen's question, there isn't an RGU account with free access. So I've been asked that before by students, but no, we don't have that one.
So, ladies, I'm very anxious for the time. And it's important that we do finish on time. I thank you very much both for your time, your knowledge. It's been really, really fascinating, actually. And I suspect that you've given everybody lots of food for thought, and we will all go and think about our confidence, not just our competence, and hopefully become superheroes in the future. So thank you very much indeed.